Welcome back to the Survivor's Guide to Thriving podcast, the show for people who are ready to break out of survival mode in order to build a truly thriving life. I'm Amanda Sollman, and along with Mark Jewell and the rest of my team here at Mark Jewell Speaking and Training, we break down common roadblocks that keep people stuck surviving and share ideas to help you thrive each and every day. This week, I'm going to be diving into a topic that I think almost every single coaching client that we've ever worked with has asked for help on. And that is, how do I manage my time better and how do I get myself more organized? And since Mark likes to refer to me as the chief of getting stuff done, I figured, hey, this must be something that falls right in my wheelhouse. So I am going to be sharing with you some tips on overcoming disorganization and getting a little bit better handle on time management. So let's get into the nitty-gritty of this. Here's one thing that I do know to be true. Your way of managing your time and of organizing yourself, those strategies are going to be very unique to you. All right, so what works for me may not be the thing that works for you, and that is totally okay. That being said, I also know from talking to many folks listening and folks like you that sometimes we have to admit when our system, or in many cases our lack of a system, is not working. Let me share with you just a few examples of folks we've worked with that have really had a hard time with managing their schedules, with managing their time. For example, we had a senior leader, a manager high up in an organization who had so many unread emails that were actually important. These were not spam. They were real emails, just unread in his inbox. And it was creating all of these bottlenecks in communication with his team, in moving projects forward. And he straight up said, I have got to get a handle on this because it's really impeding my ability to do my job. Another example is we work with tons of people who feel like they never get to the important stuff, right? They have these things that are on the back burner, but on any given day, the only thing they're doing, or they feel like they're doing, is blocking and tackling and putting out fires. So what do you do for those situations? Kind of related to the first example, but in cases where, you don't have a real good system, you can run into situations where your chaos, where your disorganization is actually hindering other people from being as effective at their job as they could be, because they just can't get what they need from you because you're all over the place. And then the last thing that I wanted to just kind of put a pin in and really highlight is burnout, right? We talk about it all the time. How do I avoid burnout? I feel like I'm getting burned out. And so much of burnout is a failure to manage our time and to stay organized and on top of our stuff. And so I think we all have experiences like these where we're feeling overwhelmed and we want to figure out how to get it back in check. Now, that all being said, I don't think you have to be a type A person, right? I know I am a type A person. That's just how it is. But I don't think you have to be like me to get a better handle on managing your time and your workload, your personal life, all of that good stuff. I do think you can learn from those of us who are type A, though. It may never come as easy to you, and that's okay. But I think even if you can make just a slight adjustment in how you approach things, how you attack things, that could be a big improvement for you. So just keep that in mind. I'm not asking you to become me or like another, really organized person in your life. That might not be realistic, but moving the needle even a tiny bit could be great for you. So here's where we're gonna go. I'm going to share with you some ideas of how to tackle time management, organization. Some of these I use, but not all of them. Some of them I've read about and just find really interesting, so I figured I'd throw them out there. And then some of them are things that I know work for some of my peers, some of my colleagues, and friends. So I'm just going to go ahead and put those on the list as well. This podcast is going to be pretty tactical. It's going to be pretty, nitty gritty, boots on the ground, pick your analogy, for here are some ways that you can very practically, logically try and manage your to-do list. But before I get to that, I want to put in a little caveat, okay? I was reading a book by Brené Brown recently, if anybody's read her book, Rising Strong. But in that, she says, quote, "People learn how to treat us based on how they see us treating ourselves." Now, that goes for a lot of different things. But when I read that line, I immediately jumped to how it paralleled with things that we here at MJST teach all of our clients. And two things in particular. One, you train others how to treat you, right? I think that's almost identical to what Brené Brown said in her book. But kind of starting from there, the second thing we often talk about is, if I don't respect my time, why should anyone else? Right? And so to me, time management and organization is actually a conversation about respect. Respecting ourselves and also teaching others to respect us and our time and our work. And so before we get into the tactical things, I want you to take a few minutes and think about, why am I struggling to manage my time and my workload in the first place? Is it because I have a fear of disappointing people and therefore I say yes to every single request that comes my way? Is it because I don't feel confident in my ability to do the project to the quality level that I expect of myself, and so therefore I put it off, I procrastinate? Is it because I think, when I do that project that people will judge me for the outcome and I'm afraid of that, so it's just easier if I don't do it and I put it off? Very rarely in my experience are time management issues because we don't know how to manage our time, right? As I was telling someone earlier today, if you want time management tactics, jump on Google. There will be blog post after blog post after blog post about how to get your to-do list in check, how to manage your time more effectively. Poor time management and poor organization is not for a lack of resources. Very often, there's something deeper going on. And so I challenge you to dig into those stories that you have about your own time management, about the requests people make of you, about judgment you're afraid of, about a lack of confidence in your own skills or ability or experience, and really dig into those first, because what you might uncover could lead you towards a more effective solution than just picking and choosing, right? We said at the top of the episode, what works for me may not work for you because my stories, my personality is different than yours. And so we're very big on understanding your hardwiring, understanding your stories. And so I just challenge you to consider, why am I struggling with this in the first place? Because it might reveal something that you might not have been aware of to begin with. The other thing I want you to think about, kind of along the same train of thought as why am I struggling, is go back to your strengths. What are you really good at? And what are the things that drain your energy? You may be the type of person who is drained by organization, by details, by, creating systems and efficiency. That's okay too. That might mean, though, that some of these solutions that we talk about are going to be more effective for you than they might be for someone else who is dealing with a different mindset challenge. So just keep that in mind. Strengths, I think, play a big role in organization and time management. So consider what yours are, because that might also reveal some clues for you. So now that I have said all of that, of how important it is to understand why you're struggling with time management, let's get into those tactical things. Let's get into the nitty-gritty, the here's what you do to fix it type ideas. And again, I said it before, I'll say it again. Some may work for you, some may not. These are just suggestions, and you can try out and see what lands. So the first one that I want to focus on is getting better at breaking down your to-do items. Okay, so what I see often happens, and this is especially in situations where people have backburnered things, right? Like I have this big project that I want to initiate, but it just keeps getting pushed to the back burner so I can do these other small day-to-day things. But when I ask about the backburnered item, they describe this really high-level vague project. Your brain is not good at dealing with high-level vague projects when it comes to execution. Now, that's not to say that there is not a place and time for idea creation and strategy and being more at that 30,000 foot level. That's great. There's a time and place for that. But if you're struggling with time management and organization and execution, now is not the time for that. There is probably much more granular items that you need to be paying attention to, and we've got to break it down, okay? So when you create your to-do list, you should consider starting each of them with a verb, and don't be afraid to get really small with the item, okay? So here's some examples. Let's say if you were creating a really vague, high-level to-do list, it might say, get a workout in. Your brain doesn't do good with that. Here's what I'd rather your to-do list look like. Set out my workout clothes the night before. Plan the workout I'm going to do. Sign up for a gym membership. Set my alarm for the morning. Each of these things are super tiny and pretty much easy to execute on, one at a time. This example and this technique comes from a book called Stick With It by Sean Young, who is a researcher, I believe, at UCLA, UC, one of the California schools. But it's a really good book all about behavior change. And that is one of the first things he talks about is getting really granular. So that's an example in terms of, getting a workout in, breaking it down into component parts. Another example might be, in a past life, your to-do list might say, plan this meeting. Okay. What I'd rather it look like is schedule the meeting, book the meeting room, send the invite, create the agenda. Okay. Notice how each of those starts with a verb. It's a very active thing. It doesn't just say agenda, invitation, right? I'm saying schedule the meeting room, send the invite, create the agenda, right? Book, send, create. Those are very action-oriented terms that your brain can comprehend. And they're tiny little parts that you can feel a sense of accomplishment when you check them off the list. Our brain, when we have too vague of a to-do list item, it becomes very easy to get overwhelmed. And when we're overwhelmed, we procrastinate. And if you've ever listened to Mel Robbins, who is the author of the 5-second rule, she'll often say that procrastination is a stress avoidance mechanism, right? So I'm trying to avoid some stress I see in the future, and so I'm going to procrastinate. That's what happens when we're overwhelmed, is we create this image in our head that this project is going to be big and scary and daunting, so we procrastinate to avoid that stress. By breaking it down into smaller, more component parts, it becomes less scary because you say, oh, I could book the meeting room. That will literally take me 3 minutes. Or, oh, I could send the invite. I'm going to block off some time to work on that, right? And some of these tasks you could even break down further. So instead of send the invite, it might say create the invitation draft, get feedback on the invitation, update the invitation design file, print the address labels, right? We can break some of these down into even smaller parts because remember, every time you accomplish something, your body rewards you with some of those really good good hormones, right? Dopamine, serotonin, like, ooh, good job, way to accomplish something. So the more that you can build in simple accomplishments into your to-do list, the more likely you are to be motivated to check off the next one, right? Because you say, oh, I did one, I can do another. So that's tip number 1. Make sure you break down your to-do list into the component parts, not big, vague items. One just a little bonus tip on this one. I also recommend that you write your to-do list all in a central place. I actually have been guilty of breaking this rule recently, and it is really stressful to have, to-do lists on sticky notes here and there, or in different notebooks, or some of them on my phone and some of them handwritten, right? Like, that gets really stressful because you can't ever remember where anything is at. So what works for me is I actually have just a small notebook that my to-do list goes in, and that notebook goes with me everywhere. And I really try to avoid, now that I got stressed out from it, I really try to avoid writing things in different notebooks or splitting them between my phone and hard copy. I try to get everything in a central location so that's where I need it when I need it. So that's tip number 1. Break down your to-do list, and bonus tip, try and put it all in one place. Okay. Another strategy, number 2, time blocking and time assignments. So once you have gotten your to-do list to be really specific, there are a couple of different strategies that I've seen work for time blocking and time assignments, and some of them can be combined, or they could even be used on their own, okay? So one strategy is, so let's say you've got your to-do list all written down in a notebook, all the component pieces. You can actually jot down next to that to-do list item how long you think it'll take you, right? Is that a 15-minute task? Is it a 30-minute task, an hour task, a multi-hour task? Whatever, jot down next to it how long you think that's going to take. Now, one tip I would give you is if you jotted down that it's going to take more than an hour, I would take a look at that and say, can I break it down into even smaller pieces? Maybe you can, maybe you can't. It just depends. Like, for example, on my to-do list quite often is publishing new podcast episodes. That would take me multiple hours because I've got to record the podcast, edit the podcast, create artwork, get it uploaded to the hosting site, all of these things. I could say, man, publishing a new podcast episode, that's like a 3 or 4 hour long project. If I break it down though, I can do in an hour, I'll record it. And then maybe the next day I'll take an hour and I'll edit it. And then maybe the next day I'll take an hour to create the artwork and get it online, right? So each day it becomes less overwhelming. Even though at the beginning it was a multi-hour task, now it's more of a bunch of, 30-minute to 1 hour long tasks. Okay. The other thing you can do if you say, okay, I've got these 15-minute long tasks, I've got these 30-minute long tasks. If you have more time than the tasks take, like say I've got a 2-hour open block in my schedule. Now I can look at my list and say, okay, what can I get done in that 2 hours, right? Oh, I'm going to pick 2 15 minutes, I'm going to pick a 30-minute, and I'm going to pick an hour-long project, and I'm going to just crank out a bunch of work. So you can do things depending on how much time you've got open in your schedule. But what this does is it saves your brain some processing time. So instead of saying, okay, I've got a 2-hour block and I'm looking at my list going, oh crap, what do I want to do with that 2 hours? Now I can literally just do some math and pick some things based on priority or just based on how easily they fit into the time that you have available. Okay. The other thing that you can do is literally block time on your calendar to work on important items. Okay. Some of you might be familiar with this, but this is based on something that is often called the Eisenhower principle because it is based on how President Eisenhower would manage his time. But the Eisenhower principle is a matrix based on 2 scales, how important something is and how urgent something is. What often happens is we find ourselves just drowning in the urgent things. Whether there are fires or not, that's what we end up spending a lot of our time on. And so for those things that are really important, but they're not necessarily urgent, you have to schedule that out and protect that time. Okay? This is about keeping a commitment to yourself to make time for the important things, right? Go back to what I said at the beginning. If I don't respect my time, neither will anyone else. And part of respecting my time is protecting that time for the important things that move my business forward, move my family forward, whatever. And so blocking time on your calendar for the important stuff is a really valuable tool. And I will literally create a meeting notice. And then if anybody else looks at my calendar, they see, oh, she's busy at that time. Okay. Now that does take some self-discipline, not gonna lie, because if you're not careful, you can just keep scheduling over yourself. But what message does that send, right? If you're willing to schedule over yourself, make yourself last priority, guess what? Everyone around you will do the same. So training yourself to hold those commitments, to make time for the important things is really, really important. Okay. The other thing with blocking time that I think can be helpful is even if you can't block the time right now, right? Let's say I have something important to do and I'm looking at my calendar for the next week and I'm just going, crap, I don't know when I'm going to block time to do this. Don't worry about it. I mean, unless it's got really hard deadlines and you need to move some things around, but don't worry about having to cram it in the most near future, right? I might look 2-3 weeks out and say, oh, there's a day where I've got some open time. That's where I'm going to block time for this important thing. And it can actually reduce your stress level just to know that it's on the calendar somewhere, right? It doesn't have to be on the calendar right this minute, but just to know, you know what? I don't have to worry about this thing because I have time earmarked for it a few weeks out. That can really help with your stress levels. So that's tip number 2. Assign times to your to-do list as to how long it will take to accomplish each thing, and block time on your calendar. And like I said, these two things can actually work in tandem with each other, right? So if I say I'm going to block an hour on my schedule every Friday at 2:00, and that is my to-do list tackling time, then I can look at my to-do list and say, okay, what can I get done in an hour? I've protected time and I'm going to knock a few things out. So you can use them together, you can use them apart, whatever works best for you. Tip number 3. Focus on the big rocks. Okay. So I was reading something recently. If anybody reads or uses the Shine app, they had some posts recently about time management. And one thing that they said is that there was some statistic from somewhere saying 41% of to-do list items are never completed. And when they were explaining why that is, it's because we often do one of two things. 1, we overplan how much we can tackle. And 2, we underestimate how much time it's going to take to tackle those items. Okay. I think that's something to be aware of as you think back to the previous suggestion of assigning times to things, is make sure you're being realistic. Like, can you actually get that thing done in 15 minutes, or is that really more of a 30-minute to an hour task? If you want to set yourself up for success, it's better to be realistic than it is to be optimistic, because sometimes optimism is setting yourself up for failure. So over planning how much we can tackle, underestimating how much time is needed, leads to almost half of to-do list items never get done in any given day. Some of you may have seen the visual analogy of big rocks. So imagine that you've got a container, and that container represents your 24 hours in any given day. If you load that container first with sand, right, the miscellaneous, unimportant stuff, but things that happen in any given day, And then you put in small rocks, which are sort of just day-to-day tasks, important, but not really the things that move your business forward. It's just what keeps your head afloat. And then you try to put your big rocks, which represent the super important things. If you try to put those on the top, those big rocks don't fit. The sand and the small rocks have taken up so much space that you can't get to the big rocks. You can't get to the important things. But when you take that container, again, representing all the time you have in a day, and you first put in your big rocks, the most important things, and then you put in your small rocks, second priority items, and then you pour in the sand, miraculously, everything fits. And if that sand doesn't all fit, it's not as big of a deal because those aren't the highest priority, most important items. And so consider how that applies to your day in real life. How much time do you spend on the sand and the small rocks, and the big rocks just keep getting put off and put off and put off? Right? We all do this. So how do you avoid it? One, going back to that Eisenhower principle and blocking time for the really important things. The other thing, which a gal by the name of Haley Goldberg actually wrote an article for the Shine app, that's all about this strategy called 1-3-5. So as you're making your to-do list on any given day, she actually recommends that it has one big item, one big rock, one really important thing that is going to move your business forward, 3 medium things or small rocks, as the visual analogy goes, right? Those are things that are important, but less important than the big rocks. And then 5 really small things, right? And to me, those 5 really small things are things that maybe take 30 minutes or less, right? You book a flight or you return a phone call to somebody. But your to-do list should have no more than the 1 big item, the 3 medium items, and the 5 small items, because that is more realistic than what most of us have on our to-do list on any given day. This 1-3-5 idea is designed to help you tackle that problem of over-planning what's realistic for you to do in any given day. I've also seen other strategies where people say, you should have no more than 2 to 3 big rocks on your to-do list. Everything else is bonus. Whatever works for you, I think the key takeaway from this tip is quit making the pages and pages and pages long to-do list and expecting that you are capable of doing that in a day. That's not to say that you don't have that to-do list just for remembering. Like, I know I have a list that is really kind of what I call a parking lot list. It's the things that I need to write down so I don't forget, but they're not actually things that need to happen today. That's totally cool. But when you're talking about my to-do list for today, it should have no more than 5 to 7 things on it, unless it is a really unique day where you think you're just going to be able to be super duper productive. And again, it's all about setting yourself up for success. Remember, when our expectations are not in line with our reality, that's when we get stressed out. And so many of us expect that we can just get so much done in a day. And when the reality doesn't match that, we get really disappointed in ourselves. So creating a to-do list that's more in line with reality can be a really helpful strategy for some people. Okay, so that's number 3. Focus on the big rocks or focus on the 1-3-5 strategy. Tip number 4. This is all about delegating and or using your resources. Now, I mentioned this earlier, but we all have different strengths available to us. If I use the language of the Strength Scope assessment, which is a tool we use here to help our clients uncover their strengths, some that fall in my profile are efficiency and detail orientation and common sense, right? I'm just naturally hardwired to do time management, to do organization pretty darn well. you may or may not have those same things. And so sometimes it can be really valuable to play to your strengths and to play to the strengths of others. Okay. So some examples of this, if you are someone who really struggles with some of these organizational things, potentially your organization might have the ability to allocate some administrative time from an administrative person to you. So maybe that's an executive assistant, or maybe there's an admin in the building who has some time capacity who could help you. And just you could get some backup so somebody could assist you in the things that just don't naturally come as easy to you. You could focus on assigning projects based on people's strengths. So if you notice, man, this thing has a lot of organizational skills needed, or it's going to require a lot of really good time management, maybe I shouldn't be the one to raise my hand for that. Maybe that should go to somebody else who's really good at it. I mentioned admins. Another type of person that you could have is like a project manager whose only job is to know where things are at in any given process and make sure that they're moving through the process in a timely manner. When I worked in an advertising agency before this, project managers were great because sometimes the people doing the work aren't always the most detail-oriented or aren't always great at managing their time. So to have that outside person reminding you when your deadlines are, what you should be working on, what should be priority, that can be a really helpful person. And again, that all goes back to using the resources that are available to you. Now, another way that I think about this, and I want you to understand where I'm coming from, but sometimes I like to think about this as a reminder of what's above and what's below my pay grade. Now, I know sometimes people can think that that's really degrading to refer to it that way, but I think we can all understand, especially as you move up in an organization over time. I think this can be hard to recognize when you're kind of, junior staff or newly hired, but as you move up in an organization, it becomes more and more important to know what the core responsibilities of your role is. And often it's not the super detail-oriented, in the weeds type stuff. And so you have to ask yourself, who should be doing these tasks? So some of the tasks that I think of are like things like booking travel, scheduling meetings, expense reports, right? This is why you see, VPs, CEOs who have executive assistants or administrative staff, because those things, they have to get done, but they're not core to why that person was hired, right? That person was hired to really have strategy, big picture, the vision. And if their time is constantly bogged down with administrative things, they can't necessarily be doing that as well as they could. And so I don't think this just applies to senior people, but I do think it is especially relevant to senior people. We constantly have to be going back to what is the best use of my time and how do I get the most ROI from my time? So sometimes it is more valuable to outsource or delegate work than it is to have certain people doing it, just because of how else they could be using that time that might have more return. Okay. So some of the questions you have to ask yourself are, one, what are some resources that are available in your organization? Right? Are there people or services that you're not tapping into that you could be tapping into that would help you be more organized or help you manage your time more effectively? The other thing is, what outside vendors could you tap into, right? I mentioned outsourcing. Sometimes paying somebody is worth the money. It's worth the investment. So consider, if you're really struggling with time management, could you have a freelance project manager, or could you have a virtual assistant, or could you have somebody else do, a very discipline specific person, right? So I'm not a graphic designer. So sometimes here we say, hey, it would be a better use of Amanda's time and money if we hired a graphic designer to do that work so that she can do other things. It's important to know what our strengths and talents are, and Sometimes it's a better use of our money to go invest that in somebody who can do things at a higher quality more quickly. Okay. So that's the last of my tips for today. So just as a recap, 1, break down your to-do list. Get them into the granular items. Make sure they start with a verb. They're not just like Amanda, invitation, right? That doesn't tell me anything. Say, talk to Amanda about creating invitation. That is something your brain can process. So tip number 1, break down your to-dos and use language that's very actionable. Tip number 2, look for opportunities to time block or to assign time to to-do list items. How long is it going to take to do them? This all goes back to that Eisenhower principle of when things are important, we have to schedule time for them, especially if they're not necessarily urgent. Tip number 3, focus on those big rocks. Make sure you're doing things each day that are actually moving your business forward, not just treading water. And then finally, look for opportunities to delegate or use your resources so that you can play to your strengths and you can leverage the strengths of the people around you. So those are just 4 of what could be hundreds of ideas to improve your time management and improve your organization. I would love to hear your suggestions. If you could leave those in the comments under this post on our website at markjeweltraining.com/podcast. And finally, big news here at MJST. We have rolled out our new mobile app. The Thrive Today app is designed to build community with other people who are focused on personal growth. It's designed to help you keep track of the behaviors you're trying to change, the habits you're trying to build to get yourself out of survival mode. And it's got tons of great resources so you can keep learning on your personal growth journey. To get that app, you can go into your app store on whatever device you have and just search for #ThriveToday and get that downloaded. We hope to see you there. Thanks for tuning in to this week's episode. If you like what you heard, make sure to jump over to Apple Podcasts and leave us a rating and review. We appreciate the feedback and it helps other people find the show. On that same note, if you enjoyed this episode, make sure to share it with a friend. As always, if you're looking for more resources to go from surviving to thriving, check out our website at www.markjeweltraining.com. That's Jewel with 2 L's. And you can find us under Mark Jewel Speaking and Training on all the major social networks. Remember, survival is dead. It's your time to thrive today. See you next week.